Welcome everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you for joining me for the 10 most underrated rock albums. So these are albums that either flew under the radar at the time or through the due course of an artist's career are simply overlooked. They're so highly underrated, the critics don't pay them any attention, and most of the general public doesn't know about it. So unless you're a diehard fan like myself who might think that some of these albums are actually the band's best albums, and I'll point out which ones I think that is when we get into the list, these albums here are generally overlooked, but I think they're worth a second look. And so before we jump into all of that and do that, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please click the button. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And as an added bonus, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this, with the 10 most underrated rock albums. All right, kicking things off at number 10, Thin Lizzy, Thunder and Lightning from 1983. Great studio album from these guys, 12th one in fact that they released, featuring new guitarist John Sykes, who came from Tigers of Pantang and of course would go on to White Snake and Blue Murder. And if you don't know Blue Murder, check them out, they are really good. Rock Candy Records just put out a great reissue of their album. This album here is tougher and more raw than previous albums, also more guitar-centric than previous albums, and here they updated to that more 80s sound. So the songs on it, though, they still flow. They're very consistently strong throughout, which I think makes it a really solid album. Unfortunately, though, 3 years after the release of this album, frontman Phil Lynott would tragically die, leaving this as the last and final Thin Lizzy album, but an amazing one at that, and definitely worth checking out. Coming in at number 9, we've got Peter Gabriel and Us from 1992, 6th studio album for him, released 6 years after the monumental album So, which of course meant that this album was going to be in the shadow of that one. This one here, though, is darker and deeper than the first one in my opinion, and I think richer in texture. Still, it managed to go platinum, so it was successful, but unable to replicate both the popularity and the hype that was behind that album So, and of course the sales that went along with it. Coming in at number 8, Queen in Jazz. This one came out in 1978 and is the band's 7th studio album. It was released, though, between two hugely monumental albums for the band and kind of got lost within that, unfortunately. And the style typical to Queen is very hard to categorize on this one. But for me, the thing that I hear that's different about this one is it sounds like the band is having a lot of fun. It's also raw at points, but very bombastic too, so a little bit different in the mix and things like that. I also think calling it jazz probably didn't help. It may have turned some people off not knowing what they were going to get. The album, though, still managed to go platinum. Coming in at number 7, Motley Crue, 1994, self-titled release. Came 6th studio album for these guys, and it was the first to feature new vocalist John Corabi, who took over from Vince Neil. You know, with John in tow, though, the band now actually could do a 2-guitar format, and so by that they were able to explore new territory on this album. They did change and modernize with the times, which is something the band had always done, but they became heavier and darker with this one here, which I think alienated a lot of longtime fans. For me, though, I find that it really gives the album depth. John Corabi did an amazing job vocally on this album here, and the album itself was certified gold. Okay, coming in at number 6, Deep Purple, Come Taste the Band from 1975, 10th studio album by these guys here. Down to only 2 original members in the lineup with John Lord and Ian Pace. The newer members, you got David Coverdale, who came in on vocals. Of course, he goes on to front White Snake. Glenn Hughes on bass, who goes on to play with Black Sabbath, among many others, in a hugely successful solo career. And you got Tommy Bolin on guitar, coming from the James Gang. So, you know, the band ended up going in a new direction with these guys here, much more blues and funk and soul, but this album has a really great groove to it. And I think at the core of what makes Deep Purple really great, it's still there. The album still rocks. It's filled with some really great guitar jams on it, and it's got killer vocals provided by David Coverdale. What more could you want on a Deep Purple album, in my opinion? Okay, we're halfway there. Coming in at number 5, we've got Kiss and Unmasked from 1980. It's the 8th studio album from these guys here. It was a transitional album from the 70s into the 80s. Very polished, format to this, the way that it was produced and so forth. I think that might have been too much for some of the fans. Also, some of the songs themselves do have that disco feel, although I think that Kiss did it really well on here. The songs are really strong though. In particular, Ace Frehley, I think, shines the most on this album. He provided 3 songs. He takes lead vocals on those 3. And in my opinion, those 3 songs really stand out from this here. But I would say that the cover and the title of it being Unmasked really threw off a lot of fans. I think they thought they were going to open this up and they would see the band take off the mask, and of course they didn't. And I think in general that ended up getting some negative publicity for sort of cheating the fans in that regard. Still though, the album managed to go gold. Okay, coming in at number 4, Van Halen, Diver Down, 1982, 5th studio album by these guys here. Most people would say this album is a throwaway album, I think due to the cover songs that are included on it. It's got 5 covers, 2 instrumentals, which only leaves 5 original songs on here. There's 12 songs total. But for me, the album is pure fun. It's like summertime. You know, if there's a way to listen to summertime, to me, it's this album here. I think the band is at the top of their game, and they take those cover songs and they make them or convert them into true Van Halen sounding songs. And in the whole album itself, they really make it their own and just shines through on this. I think it's worthy of being in anyone's collection, this particular Van Halen album. Definitely check it out if you aren't familiar with it. Okay, coming in at number 3, Yes and Drama from 1980. 10th studio album by these guys here, and it was actually the first one without original vocalist John Anderson. So they brought in 2 new members from the band The Buggles. You've got Trevor Horn on vocals, who of course would go on to be their producer for the famous 90125 album, and Jeff Downs on keyboards, who goes on to form Asia after this and has huge success with them. This album here was another album bridging the progressive 70s rock sound with the more 80s prog pop sound that would of course be more evident on the 90125 album. Critically, this album was praised. It should have been hugely successful, but for some reason, the band was met with negative reactions during the tour on this. It just didn't gel with the fans, I guess. But for me, as a fan of Steve Howe, I find this to be a very guitar-centric album and definitely worthy of that. And I think the 2 new members were very impressive on here. This album here is my favorite Yes album. Okay, coming in at number 2, AC/DC, Fly on the Wall, 1985, 10th studio album by these guys, but 9th internationally. Of course, that's what happens when you release different albums in different territories. It gets off, track a little bit like that. But 10th studio album here in the US, where I'm from. First album to feature new drummer Simon Wright, who of course played with Dio. The album though was panned at the time critically. It was considered too cookie cutter. They didn't feel that it, I guess, broke enough new ground or whatever, but I actually think it's got some of the strongest riffs on here. The album consistently rocks start to finish, and it happens to be one of my go-to albums. If I can't find anything else to listen to, I'll throw on AC/DC Fly on the Wall, and that always fills whatever it is that I need to hear. And of course, by that, it makes it my favorite AC/DC album. The album itself did manage to go platinum in the end. All right, so here we are at number 1, the most underrated rock album out there in my opinion. Again, remember this is just my opinion. Guns N' Roses, Chinese Democracy from 2008, 5th studio album by these guys. Remember, Lies is just an EP. That's why this is the 5th studio album, not the 6th. 15 years between studio albums if you count the covers album Spaghetti Incident, but I go back a little further and look at Use Your Illusion. 17 years between Use Your Illusion and this one here, because that's between the 2 studio albums of original material. So Axl and Dizzy are the only remaining members from the 1991 lineup. Expectations were so high for this. They were never going to meet them. And what they had to live up to, I don't think they were ever going to achieve. There's just no way to really do that. Despite the decades-long recording process to this, I find the album to be very cohesive in the end. They did modernize the sound and add, some additional drum beats and things, samples and things of that to it. But at the core of what makes GNR great, I think it's still there. You still have the song structure. You've got Axl's vocals, the epic songs. You got those really gritty lyrics that are on all of their tracks. And so in the end, I think this album is a really standout album. Is it Appetite for Destruction? No, but it is a great album in its own right. Ultimately, the album was certified platinum, and I find it really interesting because before the reunion tour, it was only gold. So if you haven't been to the tour and you didn't know, they've been playing quite a few songs from Chinese Democracy on the tour, which I also think shows the strength of it. And if the tour itself and the promotion through the tour simply is what has sold an additional 500,000 copies, I think that also goes to show you it is an underrated album. And there you go. That is the 10 most underrated rock albums in my opinion. I think these are the ones that the critics overlook, the general public doesn't know of, and only the diehards really care about. I hope you guys go out and give these a second listen, give them a chance. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Certainly, let me know your comments, let me know your thoughts. I hope everyone has a great day. Take care, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye, guys.